just to recap, as you said, this is the story of the titular English teacher who saw this talent in Richie, I think Richie Jenkins, and effectively gave him a name and a career through his sort of mentorship. Harry Lorty's Jenkins, Toby Jones is Burton. And as you said, the film's release coincides with the centenary of the star's birth. Two things that weren't mentioned in that interview. It's directed by Mark Evans. We'll come back to that. Written by Tom, I think, Bullock, Bullough, and Josh Hyams. So essentially, during the course of the story, we see Mr. Burton taking the young Jenkins under his wing, both, as a budding actor, teaching him to pronounce and project. And incidentally, I did a little bit of fact checking on this. The scene in which he takes him to the top of the hill to teach him how to project, apparently that's true. Apparently that really did happen. He did take
it. Was good. I enjoyed that scene.
I know, it's really, it was just figure out how to stand shouting until it doesn't hurt anymore. And then there's a wonderful thing when he comes back down and you just hear Jenkins in his ear going, and he comes by and then somebody says, "Is he all right up there?" And Toby goes, "Yes, thank you." Which is,
he's just acting.
It's just, which is lovely. And then as a sort of surrogate son, as I understand, he wasn't able to adopt him, but he became his legal ward and took his surname. And Philip Burton said that Richard was my son to all intents and purposes. I was committed to him, whilst Burton himself said, I owe him everything. So, I didn't know any of this story, I confess, before I saw the film. I don't know whether you were familiar with it before, but I wasn't at all. So essentially, the character that Toby plays, Mr. Burton, is a sort of thwarted theatrician. I mean, he writes plays and he gets stuff broadcast on the BBC, but as he says, but it's the local BBC. He fails to make the inroads into theatre that he really wants to. So perhaps there is an element of what he's doing in taking this young protege under his wing, which is a way of realising his own ambitions. Toby said in that interview that for him, the classroom was the stage. So maybe he sort of sees this as a way of fulfilling his own ambitions. But inevitably, what happens is that when you take somebody under your wing like that, tongues start to wag. There's this insinuation that there are interests that are not entirely appropriate. And you mentioned there Leslie Manville's character perhaps seeing something that he himself doesn't see. And I thought it was really good to hear Toby say that the stuff he enjoyed the most was that tension in those scenes that they did together, in which what Toby is doing, rather brilliantly, I think, is playing somebody who possibly is not completely in control of his own thoughts and emotions and ambitions. I mean, there is that sort of that tension. I also thought it was really astute that Toby said that what his co-star has to do is to act getting better at acting. And that is a really, complicated thing to do. Acting badly is very easy, but acting badly, getting better is very, very, very hard. And then as the drama progresses, we go from that initial relationship and the sort of the development of that young talent into there's a period of estrangement, followed by at the point at which Richard Burton, as he then is now an actor, but is now wrestling with the demands of, is this a real profession? What does masculinity mean? Again, weirdly enough, we were talking about adolescence before and dramas that have become part of the conversation. There is a whole thread going on in this about Richard Burton's own wrestling with what it means to be doing a job that perhaps isn't seen as a masculine job, and what it is that he's meant to be. So I think the things I like are these. Firstly, Toby Jones has an amazing way of playing an everyman with depth. So whether you think of him in The Detectorist, which incidentally I've just watched the whole of from beginning to end, because it's just comfort television, I love it, or Mr. Bates in the Post Office drama, ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances is something that he does rather brilliantly. And I think that in that phrase he used about the complicated suggestion of yearning, what a great phrase. I think he gets that just right, and I think actually the scenes with him and Leslie Manville are terrific. I'm really pleased that there was an opportunity to talk about that thing about the accent, about them taking out the line that explains that Toby's accent is meant to be sort of marinated in Englishness rather than just being sort of purely Welsh. And I think that the relationship between the two central characters, that dynamic, that thing that Toby spoke of in that interview about, it's the areas that are not explicit, that is where the real interest is. Because obviously on one hand, this is a story of triumph over adversity, of somebody growing up in surroundings which are not immediately conducive to finding their incredible artistic talent, and somebody seeing this thing in them. This is a story that movies tell all the time, the mentorship story. But what's really fascinating is what's going on around the edges of it. I mean, is the thing that's driving him because his own ambitions have been thwarted? Is the thing that's driving him something that even he can't really fully comprehend? Is Leslie Manville's character seeing something that neither of them see? And is it really to do with, what as I said, what the masculinity thing means? I think it's really significant. This is directed by Mark Evans. And I should say I am a huge fan of Mark Evans' work. I have always been a fan of his stuff. He made this incredibly nasty little horror film, My Little Lie. He made Resurrection Man, which is just fantastic and has one of the best uses of a pop music needle drop I've ever seen. He made Trauma, in which I think he got one of Colin Firth's best performances out of Colin Firth. And Colin Firth, to this day, credits working with Mark on that film as being a really big part of his career. Hunky Dory. He's I don't know. No matter what genre he works in, and he's worked in many, there's always something of grit and substance, and it feels personal. He's never made a film that felt to me like Production Line. There's also a terrific score. John Hardy, the BBC National Orchestra of Wales, performing the music. Apparently, and I didn't know this, John Hardy, nephew of Robert Hardy, lifelong friend of Richard Burton. So I've seen the film twice now, because I had spoken to Toby about it on stage a while ago, and then I watched it again coming up in the reissue, and it offers up more on second viewing than perhaps you would see on the first viewing. You could think, okay, fine, it's telling a story that's uplifting and telling a story, but it's the cracks, the edges, the things around it. I mean, there are faults. It's made for not a huge amount of money, and some of the landscapes have definitely been CGI'd to create the. But hey, that's because they're working at the very, very edge of the budget. And I thought you scratch the surface and there's more and more underneath. So anyway, lovely interview. Toby's great. Mark Evans, I'm a big fan of. And I thought it was an interesting story that I did not know. Did you know this story already?
I did know something of it. And I also know that some of the biographies of Richard Burton have certainly been somewhat more explicit, or in their suggestions as to what Philip Burton...
About the uncertain yearning.
Yes, about the uncertain yearning, which became more of a certain yearning. But I have no informed information to bring you other than what I've seen in the film. So I'm happy to go with what they show us in this particular version. And I also think that in the clip that we played you between Toby and Harry Lawty playing Richard Jenkins, Harry Lawty is English, playing a Welshman, trying to anglicise his accent slightly. Yes. So I would love to hear from Welsh listeners. What do those accents sound like to you? To English, here's the Welsh icon, bar none, Richard Burton. And when you see the film, you'll see why they cast Harry Lawty, because as I said in the interview, you can definitely see how this boy is going to grow up to be Richard Burton.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they are two Englishmen being Welsh, and to my English ears, they sounded very good. But if you'd like to get in touch, Michael Sheen, let us know what you think. Or
well done for personalising that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just Michael, but obviously anyone can.
No, but Michael speaks on behalf, doesn't he? It's like
well, he does. He does kind of. Yes, he's the Prince of Wales, really.
He is.
If we've knighted Sanjeev, we could sort of make Michael I suspect he probably wouldn't
Is
want
it-
to be a prince.
Is it possible to ask, is there a better and more decent person around at the moment than Michael Sheen?
I think, you see, that's another of your socialist fantasies.
Is
Which
it?
you
Okay,
just
I'm
need-
sorry.
They need to be
Okay.
stamped out.
Stamped out.